I have spent weeks looking for a phrase about boots. The idea was simple enough. If people who have never met each other, in different decades, in different states, keep describing the same specific piece of footwear, that detail means something, because nobody coordinated it. So I went looking for that phrase in the testimony itself. It is not there. Not as a quotable line, repeated, attached to named witnesses. I want that said in the first minute, before anybody catches me at it. What is there is stranger and better documented, and it has a name inside the research. A category of accounts where the figures are not gray and not silent. They are uniformed. They are shaped like men, standing up. And the marks that would identify them have been taken off their clothing. The interesting thing was never the boots. It was who removed the name tags. Let me be exact about what I looked for and what I found, because the difference is the whole video. What I looked for was a phrase. Combat boots. Appearing independently, in the words of named people, across accounts with no connection to each other. That would matter. A detail in unconnected testimony does something a detail everybody has read cannot do. I could not source it that way. There is no corpus of named witnesses repeating that phrase. It is not a verified pattern, and I will not dress it up as one. What I found instead sits one level up. The clothing is documented. Uniforms, dark utilities, battle dress. The general category is all through this literature, in the summaries and the composites, described again and again by researchers working from testimony. The specific words are mine, the clothing is theirs. So this is not a report, it is a question, and the question is this. Why does a category of clothing keep turning up in a genre that is supposed to be about something that does not wear any? And before I go any further, let me name the trap I am walking into, because it is a real one, and it catches almost everybody who works on this material. Look for a detail long enough in a body of writing this large, and you will find it. You will always find it, eventually. There are thousands of accounts, and a person hunting for boots will come home with boots. Confirmation is cheap here. I know that. There is a section near the end of this video where I hand the entire thing to somebody who takes it apart with peer-reviewed data. The boots are my question, the uniforms are the record. I am not blending them. Go back to the beginning of the genre. New Hampshire, 1961. Betty and Barney Hill. Everything downstream runs through that case. The gray figure, the missing hours, the regression sessions, the shape of every account that came after it. If you have a picture in your head of what an abduction looks like, the Hills put it there. Now here's the part that gets left out when people retell it. In Betty's recurring dreams afterward, the short gray men were not naked and they were not featureless. They were wearing blue suits and caps. Military-style cadet caps is how it comes down to us. Sit with that for a second because of when it happened. This is 1961. There is no MILAB literature. There is no Bud Hopkins. There is no genre yet for anybody to be contaminated by. The clothing is on the figures in the founding case, at the origin, before there was anything to copy. There was physical residue too, and it is oddly domestic. Barney's shoes came back badly scuffed. Betty's dress was torn at the hem and marked with a pink powder that nobody ever identified. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the moment where a video like this usually overreaches. I'm not telling you soldiers took the Hills. I'm not telling you the caps were real caps. Betty reported dreams, and she reported them after the fact, and dreams are the softest evidence there is. What I'm saying is narrower, and I think harder to dismiss. The two categories people treat as separate, the gray and the uniform, were never separate. They showed up together, in the first case, in a dream, in 1961. It took another 38 years before anyone gave the overlap a name. The name is MILAB, Military Abduction. It traces to Helmut Lammer of the Austrian Space Research Institute, who with Marion Lammer published a book in 1999 called MILABs, Military Mind Control and Alien Abduction. They built it out of two things: declassified material from MK Ultra and Artichoke on one side, first-hand testimony on the other. There's a second term running alongside it. Melinda Leslie coined REAB, reabduction, for accounts where somebody reports being taken a second time by apparent military personnel, after the original encounter, not instead of. After. One fact from Lammer's model matters more than the rest, and it cuts against the phenomenon rather than for it. He held that these cases are almost entirely American. There are a small number of unconfirmed claims out of Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. 3 countries, unconfirmed. That is the whole of it. Think about what that asymmetry could mean, because it can be read 2 ways, and I'm not going to pick one for you. A phenomenon that respects national borders is behaving like a cultural artifact. It is also behaving exactly like a phenomenon that follows military installations, of which the United States has more than anybody. Both readings fit. Neither is testable from where I am sitting. Now the part I have to say out loud before we go on, because I have been burned by not saying it. None of this is peer-reviewed. It is researcher-compiled, assembled by a small number of people, some of whom knew each other, corresponded with each other, and read each other's work before they collected their own testimony. That is a contamination pathway, and it is a real one. A name is not evidence. But somebody noticed the same thing enough times to need a word for it. Here's the detail that made me take this seriously, and it is not about clothing at all. It is about geometry. Running through this literature is a difference in the shape of the room. The standard abduction accounts describe the exam room as round, curved walls, sterile, no corners. That description is remarkably stable across decades of testimony. The MILAB accounts describe the room as rectangular, and the restraint changes with the shape. In the standard accounts, people describe paralysis. The body simply stops answering. Nothing is holding them down, and they cannot move. In the MILAB accounts, people describe being physically held, straps, hands, weight on the chest, not an inability to move, a prevention of movement. Those are different experiences, and the people describing them are not confused about which one they had. Richard Sauter, introducing the Lammer's book, lists what recurs in this material: detention without process, sedation without consent, narco-hypnosis, hostile interrogation, implants, invasive medical examination. Read that list again and notice something about it. Every single item is a thing humans do to humans. Every one of them has a paper trail somewhere in the 20th century, in a program that got a budget and an acronym and eventually a declassification date. A round room is a ship, a rectangular room is a building, and a building has a floor and a corridor and a door, and people who walked in through that door wearing something on their feet. I'm not claiming these were facilities. I want that stated flatly, because I can feel this section trying to run ahead of its evidence. I'm noting that the descriptions changed shape. Whatever else is going on in this material, one set of these accounts has stopped describing a craft. It is describing architecture. Now the clothing, at the level the sourcing can actually hold. The Lammers, summarizing composite testimony, describe officers whose name tags and other identifiers had been removed from their uniforms. Not missing, not absent because nobody bothered, removed. That is the detail I care about, and it is not the boots. Boots are a costume. Stripped insignia is a procedure. Somebody with rank looked at a group of men before they went into a room and made a decision about what would not be visible on them. I put that to a man I'll call Whitlock, a composite of several people who spent their careers in uniform issue and supply and would talk to me but not be named. 26 years of it. He was not remotely impressed by the mystery. Stripping identifiers is ordinary, he said. It has boring uses and it has non-boring ones, and it is the first thing you do when you want a man present but not attributable. Now the part where I throw away my best material. The most vivid uniform descriptions in this literature, the special operations gear, the SWAT-style battle dress, the stuff that would make the best 30 seconds of this video, come from a self-published source with no publisher, no peer review, and remote viewing claims sitting on the same pages. I'm not using it. You should be suspicious of anyone who does. Same with the Dulce material, and this one is worse. It traces back to a single uncorroborated man who was in a documented psychiatric crisis at the time, a crisis other researchers stood around and exploited. I am not building a video on the worst year of a sick man's life. What is left is smaller. uniforms with the names taken off. And that is the whole claim. So, who is actually saying this? The real numbers are smaller than you would expect. Robert Hastings interviewed 169 military veterans about incidents at American nuclear weapon sites. 7 of them, separately, reported abduction experiences involving non-human intelligence. Of those 7, 1 described 2 figures in United States military uniforms working alongside the Greys. Another described human or human-like figures in uniforms he could not identify, also standing in the room. One of the 7 can be named. A former Air Force security policeman identified as Barth, assigned to Vandenberg Air Force Base from July of 1964, describing an incident that year while pulling guard duty at a Minuteman site. Melinda Leslie told the International UFO Congress that more than 3 dozen people, herself included, reported being taken a second time afterward by apparent military personnel and physically examined. In one case, the men were wearing hazmat suits. She described being interrogated by a man she identified as a military captain who wanted everything she knew about the aliens. Now, the other side of those numbers said as plainly as I said the first side. This is self-selected. People who attend a UFO Congress are not a random sample of anything. Leslie is reporting a group that she herself compiled and belongs to. And 7 out of 169 is also 162 out of 169 who reported nothing remotely like this. One more fence, because I know where the comments go. The 2023 congressional testimony about recovered craft and biologics is a different claim, made by a man reporting what other people told him. It does not corroborate any of this, and I'm not stapling them together. 7 veterans, 3 dozen conference attendees. That is the evidentiary base. For any of this to work, you need one thing, and it is a hard thing. You need a way for a person to sincerely remember something that did not happen, while a real event sits underneath it. Not lying, not confused. Remembering, with full conviction, the wrong thing. That mechanism exists. It has a name, and it did not come from the skeptics. Bud Hopkins was a painter who became a UFO researcher, and he published a book called Missing Time, comparing people from unconnected backgrounds who were reporting disturbingly similar experiences. What he kept running into were accounts that did not sit right, memories that felt thin, memories that could not possibly account for the size of the fear attached to them. A person would describe something ordinary and be terrified of it. He called them screen memories. His theory was that something had been laid over the top of the real one. He used hypnotic regression to try to get underneath. Now hold that next to what this video has been asking. The exact mechanism a staged human theater theory needs was proposed by the man who did more than almost anyone alive to build the gray narrative in the first place. Hopkins believed something non-human did the covering. The mechanism does not care who did it. And the people who worked this material do not agree with each other, which I think matters more than either of their conclusions. David Jacobs, a historian at Temple, hypnotized more than 700 subjects across 25 years and reads it as infiltration. Hostile, deliberate, ongoing. John Mack at Harvard read the same category of account almost benignly. 2 credentialed men, the same corpus, opposite answers. The tool that could take the Greys apart was built by the people who assembled them. Here's the part where I hand the whole thing over. Susan Clancy, working with McNally, Schachter, Pittman, and Lenzenweger, published in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology in 2002. People reporting recovered abduction memories showed significantly higher false recall and false recognition on a standard memory distortion test than the control group. But read the finding properly, because it is more interesting than the headline. Accurate recall did not differ between the groups. These are not people with bad memories. They are people more susceptible to one specific kind of induced error, which happens to be the exact error that hypnotic regression is best in the world at producing. Clancy also found higher fantasy proneness in this group, vivid imagery, frequent daydreaming, elevated hypnotic suggestibility. Then there is McNally on camera, in a PBS documentary in 1997, measuring abductees while they recalled their experiences. elevated heart rate, skin conductance climbing, real physiological stress, the kind you cannot fake in a lab. Hopkins took that as validation. McNally attributed it to false memories formed during sleep paralysis, which produces terror that is indistinguishable from the real thing because, for the person in the bed, it is the real thing, and the counterweight to the counterweight. John Mack interviewed close to 100 people over 4 years, published 13 cases, and found no pathology in them. A literature scholar reviewing the whole field called his account as fair-minded as anything written on the subject. I put the problem to a woman I'll call Ellery, a composite of the clinicians who spoke to me and would not be named. She said one thing that has stayed with me since. A detail that recurs across a literature people have all read tells you about the literature. The detail cannot carry the weight. The question survives anyway. I never found the phrase, "I want to end where I started," because a question does not become a finding just because you spent 30 minutes on it. The boots were mine, never theirs. What holds is smaller and harder to shake off. The first case in the genre already had cadet caps and blue suits on the figures in 1961 before there was anything to copy. And 38 years later, a category of accounts arrived describing rectangular rooms, hands holding people down, and uniforms with the names taken off them. Nobody has ever explained why the clothing keeps showing up. A torn hem and a pink powder. A cadet cap in a dream. A round room and a rectangular one. 7 out of 169. Bare sleeves where the name should be. I do not know who they were. Somebody dressed them. Somebody took the labels off. If you enjoy stories like this, please hit subscribe and leave a like. See you in the next one.